Anyway, my book is a very slender book, 80 pages. It's 4 trips to the toilet. There are 3 stories that are fiction and 1 nonfiction piece. It took me 10 years to write them, and I'm glad I'm done. I'm going to read a very short segment from one of the stories, and then I'm going to show some slides, some photographs of bridges, and tell a few stories. So thanks very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy what we're going to do here. So here's a short piece, like a couple pages from the very beginning of a story called Occurrence at Oakland Bay Bridge. He was standing on the upper deck of the bridge, his feet right on the farthest edge of the upper chord of the roadway, facing north by northwest. The shimmering fantasy skyline of San Francisco was clearly visible just past his left shoulder. The gray-blue mass of Angel Island and Alcatraz floated like bloated sea serpents in the middle of the bay. He didn't need to look behind him to know that there was a horrendous traffic backup, a solid mass of cars stretching from San Francisco to Yerba Buena Island. He could hear the cacophony of commingled voices as thousands exited their vehicles, their pace quickly accelerating into an ungodly panic with a pitch that ate into his mind like dung beetles burrowing into the flesh of some recently dead animal. He knew then, just as he clawed his way up out of the evil light of his dream and back into the cold light of his bedroom at dawn, that the bridge would one day fall and that he would be there. The chances of surviving a leap from the deck of the Bay Bridge 200 feet to the waters of San Francisco Bay were slender. You'd be falling at the speed of 60 to 70 miles an hour at impact. A body striking the water at that rate of descent would act much as a tomato hurled full strength at a wall. As a teenager, he had read an article in San Francisco Magazine that stayed with him through the years. The piece featured interviews with 13 surviving jumpers from the Bay's sexier sister, the Golden Gate. One of the survivors came up with a tomato metaphor when pressed by the interviewer. The journalist guessed that tomatoes and people wouldn't react entirely the same when confronted by such extreme experiments in physics. The survivors, second chance suicides one and all, seemed to have very little to say. The only thing that they all agreed upon was that through design or through chance, each one of them hit the water like an arrow, straight up and down, at a right angle to the water's surface. They seemed humble, something he found odd, considering they had challenged death and won. They all declared their plunge to be the defining moment of their reminted lives. It turned out that this was wishful thinking, at least in the case of a few of them. So that's the first 2 pages of that story. Now I'm going to go into, you have to get the book to read the rest of it. I'm going to go into the slideshow and tell some stories about bridges. Uh-oh, I think I brought the wrong slide tray. Yeah. Actually, this slide we found in a slide tray in an abandoned building in Massachusetts. It was actually an abandoned asylum. I was there with Julia Solis, a friend of mine, an urban explorer, and I just kept it. It seemed like a good slide, so I kept it. I started taking photographs of bridges in the mid-'80s. I did a trip to Europe and ended up staying mostly in Britain. And I started photographing bridges there. I had never really taken photographs before too much. And this is a Clifton suspension bridge in Bristol, South England. And it's an interesting bridge. It was built by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who has the absolute all-time coolest name for a bridge engineer. And he built this bridge over the Avon Gorge. And the Avon Gorge, this bridge shares something in common with the Golden Gate Bridge, and that is the fact that this is where people in England go to commit suicide. Now they jump off of this bridge and they fall down to the Avon River estuary, which is about 6 or 8 inches of water and 40 feet of very fine viscous mud. Now people have been jumping off this bridge for 100 years, well, 80 years longer than the Golden Gate. Actually, I guess it'd be about 70 years longer. And they don't retrieve a lot of the bodies. So you can imagine what some future archaeologist is going to come upon when they start looking into this area. There are probably hundreds of body pods down the mud below. While I was up on this bridge, with a friend, some guy came out in the middle and started trying to jump off of the bridge. And if you look in the middle, right in mid-span, there's a little car there with lights on. That's the Bobby who stays in the little shed on the other end of the bridge on the far side. And he noticed that there was a screaming match going on in the middle of the bridge, drove out there, and a guy was trying to jump off and commit suicide, and his lover was trying to hang on to him and not allow him to jump. So Bobby jumped out of his car, and we watched while he pulled him back over the railing, and and took them away in the car. This is the Menai Straits Bridge over to Holyhead Island in Wales, an incredibly beautiful bridge built by Thomas Telford. And this is looking at it from down the estuary ways. This bridge is an interesting bridge because it's a suspension bridge, but what do you notice about it that doesn't look like your typical suspension bridge? It doesn't have cables, it has what are called I-bar connectors, very much like a bicycle chain. And this type of bridge was not that common, but there were some of them built in the 1880s and 1890s and through the 20s.
I-bars, isn't that what failed on the Bay Bridge?
Yeah, but they're not just, they weren't suspender cables for the suspension span. The I-bars were tension and compression, or actually tension beams for the, he's asking about the Bay Bridge failure. And it was indeed an I-bar, but in a different, completely different engineering use. But yeah, it was an I-bar that failed. This is the Firth of Forth Railway Bridge in Scotland. Is the most massive structure, overbuilt structure that ever made. It's actually an incredibly beautiful bridge, but the engineer went to great pains to make this bridge completely indestructible, because it was constructed a few years after one of the greatest bridge disasters in history, the falling down of the Tay River Bridge, the Tay Estuary Bridge, about 100 miles from here. A major bridge built by Thomas Bouch. He was the most lauded engineer in England at the time. He died about 6 months after his bridge collapsed, killing 57 people, supposedly from pneumonia, but everyone's pretty sure he killed himself. So when they built this bridge, which was a little ways away, they made sure that it would never, ever fall down. The tubular steel members that you're looking at are 9 feet in diameter with, like 3/4 inch steel walls. I mean, it's ridiculously heavy. Here's a shot of it, looking at it. So it's quite an astonishing structure. And it's beautiful despite its ponderous nature. It's beautiful. Looking at it from the other side. And it's a railway bridge. 2 rail lines that run across it. You could put 10, 20, 30 train cars entirely stretched all the way across the bridge, completely filled to capacity with a load, and it would not collapse or even get close to collapsing. This is still in England. This is a transporter bridge. Now, what's wrong with this bridge? Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this bridge? Okay, I guess some of you got. It's not a bridge, actually. What it is it's a suspended deck that's suspended from these 2 towers, which are anchored by standard suspension cables. And from that deck, a trolley car ride on cables runs right at the water level and runs across and takes cars, buses, and people across on the transporter. There were several of these built around the turn of the last century, 19 teens, 20s, and 30s. The largest one is in Marseille Harbor in France, and it was bombed and destroyed by the Germans in order to jam up the harbor entrance during World War II. I'm sitting on top of the bridge, or the suspended deck, rather. This is another one. This is a Middlesbrough transporter bridge in northern England, and it is not a suspension bridge. It is a cantilever beam or a cantilever span mounted on 4 legs, no cables. Now this bridge, we went there in the middle of the day, and I thought, what the heck, why don't we just knock on the door and see who's here? There's a little shed underneath the bridge, and so we knocked on the door, and there was a fellow named Harry Todd, who was the chief engineer of the Middlesbrough transporter bridge. And this was 1986. And I think we were the first people to stop in to his little shack and ask him about the bridge in a long time, because he was really, really happy to see us. And talked for quite a long time about the bridge, which I was very fascinated to hear everything he said. And after we talked to him for about an hour and a half, he gave us the keys to the bridge. And that's where we went, up on top of the bridge. And we stayed up there most of the day, just kind of hanging out, walking around. So I kept taking photographs of bridges. I was just interested in taking more photographs. I was in between period. The group that I was in earlier, the Suicide Club, kind of died, and there weren't that many group activities going on, so I just kind of kept taking photos. So I came back to the States after being in England for 4 or 5 months, drinking a lot of beer and climbing a lot of bridges. And I actually ended up going up to Vancouver, where I came upon the Lion Gate Bridge, which is a really amazing bridge built in the 30s. And I climbed up to the top, and while climbing up, this bridge was in pretty poor repair. Like many bridges around that time, they hadn't painted it recently. We were in kind of an economic slump, and particularly a lot of New York bridges were in really bad shape. But this bridge hadn't been painted in a while. It was really tough shape. And as I came up the shaft inside the tower leg, and I got up to the top, and I tried to open this little hatchway. A lot of bridges have, older bridges, particularly suspension spans or steel spans, have what look like ship's hatches that open up. They're not actually watertight or anything, but they're oval. And I tried to open this hatch and it wouldn't open, and I could tell there was something on the other side, like some ponderous thing holding it closed, and I couldn't open it. So I had to climb all back down 50 feet, cross over horizontally to the other leg of the tower, climb back up. And when I got up on top of the bridge, I saw what was barring the door, and it was a mammoth osprey nest that had been built right inside that little alcove behind the door. Big ass 3.5, 4 feet by 4 feet osprey nest. This is a picture that you get to decide which way's up. Because I've had this slide for a while and I actually don't know which angle I took it from at all. I can tell that there's like a catwalk on the top, the black catwalk on the top part, probably shooting from below up would be my guess, but I honestly don't know. This is the same bridge, the Lion Gate Bridge. This is a lift bridge in Sacramento, which is a really cool bridge. Lift bridges are sections where bridges where the middle section raises up, and then the towers have these giant concrete things about as big as this building. And you can see, if you look across that tower in the 4 windows, there's this big thing in there, big square thing. That's a giant chunk of concrete that's 100 feet wide by 25, 30 feet tall. And it goes down, and the middle section, which is directly below you in the middle, goes up. And this is the first bridge of this type that I rode the counterweight on, which is super fun. And it doesn't make any noise at all, hardly. It's the largest thing I've ever seen move without making any noise. This is the Bay Bridge. I didn't have too many photos in this particular collection of the Bay Bridge, but this is the cantilever span looking west towards San Francisco. And this is one of my favorite bridges, the very underappreciated Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, which is a very beautiful bridge. And if you know the bridge, there's a little island right out in the middle of the water there called Red Rock. What you probably don't know is directly underneath the roadway of the bridge there's a reef that at low tide is actually an island, and at high tide it's underwater. And I was going along underneath the roadway by myself one night, climbing out here, the first time I climbed this bridge, and all of a sudden I'm assaulted by this cacophony of incredibly loud growling noises, and really scary. I almost fell off the bridge. And I looked down and there was an undulating wall of flesh 100 feet underneath me, and it was sea lions on this reef. And I bothered them by walking along, because they don't usually have people coming through their little place, so they all started yelling at me all at once. It was pretty weird and scary. I didn't forget it. This is another shot. This is a shot looking through one of the horizontal members, I think, of the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. It's been a long time since I took this photo. But you can get an idea of the structural construction details of the bridge itself, the members, the compression, the tension members. And it's pretty cool how it all fits together and works. Hard to believe. I took a shot, I walked into the frame. It's kind of a little ghosty thing there where I'm on the right-hand part of the frame of the bridge, looking towards, I think that's looking towards, I don't know which way that's looking. Maybe it's looking towards Richmond, can't tell for sure. And then there's the Golden Gate Bridge, which I climbed for the first time in 1977 with Peter Field, and then started climbing regularly with Gary Warren and Jason Wechter and other friends of mine in the San Francisco Suicide Club. There are many ways to climb the bridge. One way that we used most was to go out on the horizontal member underneath the road deck, the lower chord of the road deck, out to the tower itself, and then into hatchways and up inside the tower. It took us a long time to figure out how to get to the top of the bridge, actually several months, because the towers are honeycomb of parallel vertical passageways. So the other way we would climb up, we devised a way we would climb up from the base, where I took a softball, put a string through it, would go to the base of the bridge at Line Point, throw it up over the railing, have it bounce back through, pull it through with a rope attached to it, pull the rope down, and pull up a climbing ladder, a very lightweight aluminum climbing ladder, which everyone would then climb. And then we'd get up on the lower deck of the stanchion, support stanchion for the north tower of the Golden Gate Bridge, and climb up inside. And this is one of the diagonal members underneath the roadway. Inside one of the diagonal chambers, looking up. And then, I think oh yeah, this is up on the the third horizontal crosspiece above the roadway, which we were getting to for some time before we figured out how to get up to the very top. It's a long story, but there are only a few shafts that actually open up on the very top of the tower. And here's looking over at Fort Point, looking up from the, actually this is from the second, from the top horizontal crosspiece. The third one up, that's looking straight up at the cables. And this is looking down the cables towards Marin County. And So the Golden Gate Bridge, we started climbing it in this group called the Suicide Club. And I was 18 when I joined that group, and it was a pretty cool, pretty hard to describe, pretty cool group that I felt very fortunate to get involved with, because I probably, being a juvenile delinquent, I probably would have ended up in jail or maybe a roofer or something if I hadn't run into this group. But I did, and we would do things like explore abandoned buildings, which there were a lot of in San Francisco at the time, really into exploring the urban infrastructure. And we would do games, live action role-playing games on the street. We would do street theater, which we were really, really bad at. And but we would do it, and we weren't really doing it for an audience. The idea of the club was that we would do things that frightened us, and do things that challenged us, and do things that we could do together in a group. And street theater was something that was pretty frightening to me, because you're making an idiot of yourself on the street, and I was raised middle class and wasn't used to that, or was taught not to do that as a child. And so the scariest thing, I mean, climbing the bridges it didn't scare me at all. I love climbing things. I was never afraid of heights or climbing. Many people in the group were pretty normal, pretty average folks, pretty cool, some of them, but not, we weren't, no actors, no, Einsteins per se, but they were doing exceptional things. And so a lot of people would climb these bridges, and what you don't realize maybe when you look at a bridge is that it's made to climb. I mean, they're ladders, they're not that difficult to climb. You don't need to be, a world-class, Yosemite face climber to climb these bridges. You just have to figure out how to do it. So these people, friends of mine, would go up these bridges, and something they would never have thought of doing, and they just, to this day, they look at a bridge and they look at it completely differently. It's not just something for cars to go over. For me, the frightening thing in that group was being embarrassed. And so the most frightening event that we did, the thing that really chilled me out, was getting naked on a cable car. I was mortified by that, completely mortified. I was sick for days beforehand. Had a stomach ache and was sweating bullets when we did. And then we finally did it. We're in Chinatown. We jumped off this cable car with 30 people and took off our rain jackets and our dashikis, and we're there naked in the street, 6:30 in the morning. And all these little Chinese ladies were going to work carrying their bags, and they completely ignored us. Like we weren't even there. And I kind of started getting over my fear of being embarrassed in public at that point in life. Oh, here's another shot looking down towards Marin, and another one looking over at the fort.
Tell a story about almost getting caught by the bridge guys.
Tell a story about almost getting caught by the bridge guys?
When you went down.
Oh, you mean on the Bay Bridge?
No, on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, it's in the book. That story that Jennifer was suggesting that I tell. Thanks, Jen. And it's the last story, and it's a true story about how I was chased for 12, 14, 16 hours throughout the tower by a bunch of people with guns, and I didn't get caught. So, anyway, it's too long of a story to tell now. This is up at the top, looking over. Now, technically my photos aren't that great, but they're of really cool places, so, kind of get the picture. This is great photos, not my photo. It's taken by Mark Northcross, who's a friend of mine who's in the Suicide Club. And another one taken at night in the fog. And here's a group up at the top of the Golden Gate back in I don't know when, 84, 85 maybe. And like I say, we used to climb it in groups, and the statute of limitations run out on this bridge stuff for me. The last time I climbed a bridge was in 2001, and with the advent of Homeland Security, and post 9/11, it's really serious crime now. When it was just not that serious before. I have a friend in Detroit who was caught climbing the Ambassador Bridge, which is an astonishingly beautiful bridge, and it's an international crossing in Detroit. And he was arrested and went away for 3 months without due process. Nobody knew where he was, and he wasn't booked. Okay, and they held him for that time, and then they released him. So that was kind of scary. So I don't climb bridges anymore, although maybe we'll someday. The Golden Gate, like I said, is one of the most amazing structures in the history of human engineering. Built in a tidal inflow, one of the strongest in the world. The footings of the South Tower, the creation of the footings for the South Tower is just an incredible adventure story. There's several good books written about the building of the Golden Gate Bridge. The best one probably being The Bridge by John Vanderzee, I think his name is. I recommend reading that. It's quite a dramatic book. People died in the construction of these bridges. The most intense accident was when, this was one of the first construction jobs that they had safety nets on. And they had a massive safety net underneath the road deck, and a big beam cut loose at some point, fell into the safety net, and pulled, I think, 7 guys down to their death on this, wrapped up in the safety net, fell into the water, so it wasn't that safe for them. And so these bridges have spirits in them, and one of the stories in my book kind of recounts my experience with some of the spirits in these bridges. Here's another shot looking over. And so we started climbing the bridges, and we started going up like on holidays, like on July 4th, which we did for July 4th in 1986 or 7, I can't remember. So the Golden Gate Bridge, like I say, it's just a pretty astonishing structure. Bridges in New York, I mean, New York City has more major spans than any other place in the entire world, and they're all built, most of them are built between like 1890, or 1880 if you want to count the Brooklyn Bridge, and the 30s. And the technology is all, I mean, now it's almost 100 years old, and 100 years old more in some instances. The Brooklyn Bridge, you know, here's another shot from the bridge on July 4th. I'm going to go back to some photos that I didn't take, but they're taken in New York when we were climbing bridges there in the late 70s. These photos were taken by Bill Costura and by Jason Wechter, I think are the two, and there might be one taken by Henry Petrofita in there as well. The Suicide Club did trips to New York starting in '78. We did 3 or 4 trips, and we go sneak into tunnels and explore buildings and climb bridges while we were there. One night, Jason and I climbed, we climbed the Williamsburg Bridge, and then that was a piece of cake because there's just a walkway going up, a stairway going up. And hey, let's go climb the Manhattan Bridge. So we go climb the Manhattan Bridge, which this is the top of the Manhattan Bridge. And then when we're done with that, we're still kind of amped and like, hey, let's go climb the George Washington Bridge. So we went and climbed the George Washington Bridge. And by this time it was 4 in the morning. And he goes, hey, let's go climb the. Remember, we were like in our early 20s, so we were pretty energetic. He said, hey, let's go climb the parachute jump at Coney Island. So we did. And we watched on from Coney Island on the parachute jump, which is this giant abandoned structure about 200 feet tall. So this is the top of the Manhattan Bridge, looking at this pretty bizarre, stylized architectural unit. It's a pretty cool thing, bigger than your car, and there are 4 of them on each tower. This is looking across the 59th Street Bridge towards Manhattan, or the Queensboro Bridge. Jason and I climbed this bridge the first time, and we sang Feeling Groovy the entire way up, which is otherwise known as the 59th Street Bridge song. We weren't being arch, it was just fun. So this bridge, at some point one of the bridges in New York is just going to fail, it's just going to collapse. These bridges, they figured they were good for 100 years when they were constructed. Many of them are over 100 years old now. This bridge in particular is the one that I feel someday it's just going to collapse. It's a beautiful bridge, it's an amazing bridge, and it was built by Gustav Lindenthal, who was the chief bridge engineer of New York City, but it's old, and you know, it's one of these days, boom. Here's the top, a crazy architectural feature on top of the 59th Street Bridge. And this is the Hellgate, looking off from the Hellgate Bridge towards it's a railway bridge out in between Queens and Manhattan. And this is the Brooklyn Bridge, this is one of Jason's shots, and it's not a really great reproduction, but you kind of get the idea. And we climbed the Brooklyn Bridge, I climbed it 4 times over the years, and just by going up the cables, there's no other way really up. The towers are made of these monolithic stone blocks, and there's no passageway inside that we could find. And then we went to the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge, which was the largest bridge in New York, and for many years the longest span bridge in the world, built by Othar Rahman, one of the two great bridge engineers of the 20th century. His rival, David Steinman, both New Yorkers, and between the two of them they built most of the great spans in the country in the 20s and the 30s. Anyway, the Verrazano-Narrows is quite an amazing bridge. Double-deck roadway, just like the Bay Bridge. And inside, the top of the tower looks something like this. And there's a chamber that's bigger than your apartment, by quite a bit, taller, and probably 100 feet long, 12, 14 feet wide, and 18 feet tall, something like that. 20 feet maybe, actually, I think it's more than that. But as engineering techniques got more and more advanced, and bridge towers could be made with less steel, the idea was always to use less material for more strength. And as material engineering got better over the years. People, engineers could use less material to build the bridge. Like this bulkhead here, like on the Golden Gate Bridge, there's no open bulkhead like this. They're all 3 by 3.5 by 3.5 cellular chambers. So they're all reinforced like a honeycomb, so it's incredibly strong. Now, 30 years later when they built this bridge, they could build a bridge with massive bulkhead chambers and not all that steel because engineering techniques allowed them to build stronger steel and better connections. Capable of sustaining more compression and more tension, which are the two forces at work in bridges. The Suicide Club in the top, at the cable saddle inside the top of the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge in 1980, I think this was. And I'm in there hanging on the ladder, and Jason, and Bill Costura, and Henry Petrofita, Alice Curtis, Pierre Barral, I think, is in there, maybe Mark Northcross. We're still here, we're still in the Manhattan Bridge. These are shots that were taken by Herod Blank, Herod, are you in the room here somewhere? I thought he was. Anyway, Herod Blank took these shots in 1996 when we were in New York, and I hadn't been there in a while, hadn't climbed bridges in a while. We went up on the Manhattan Bridge, and Herod took some shots from the top. Here's one of them, and another looking at Manhattan. And here we are on top of the bridge, hanging out. And New York City's like, it's kind of was a wonderland for urban exploration. It still is. Like I say, it's more difficult now with the Homeland Security stuff that's been going on, but there are a bunch of people who do UE stuff in New York and other cities and taking risks that, I can't really afford to take anymore, I guess. Having a kid and a business and things like that, I can't be put away for 3 months without anybody knowing where I am, but at least it would be inconvenient, let's put it that way. But people still do it, and they still climb the bridges occasionally, although it's much riskier than it used to be, and still go in the tunnels. The group in New York that I'm affiliated with is called Dark Passage, run by Julia Solis, and it's affiliated with the Madagascar Institute. And Dark Passage has done some wonderful urban exploration adventures over time. And Julia's and her associates have created events, really elaborate events that take place in abandoned insane asylums and things like that. And they're just a great group. I suggest you look them up online. It's Dark Passage, and that's their underground group. And their above-ground underground group is called Ars Subterranea, which is a historical group, and they don't, encourage that you can do anything illegal in that group. They get grants, give them a grant, they deserve it. They're a very cool group. And back to the Golden Gate Bridge. One time, I always wanted to talk about, like crazy things happening in the bridge, and putting big groups or going up in stupid costumes or maybe having sex or something like that. And all those things happen in the bridges. I went there for the 50th anniversary of the bridge in 1987, May 27th, 87. And, I'm sorry? 24th. 24th, you're right. All right. Okay. May 27th. And there were about 800,000 people out there for the celebration. And there were a handful of yuppies in Marin County who were really put out that all these people were there blocking their way to their stupid offices for one day. And they kind of protested about it, and everybody blew them off, and they had a giant, amazing public celebration, which nearly made the Golden Gate Bridge collapse. Now, some of you may have heard about that, but when you had 800,000 people out there, most of them ended up getting on the tower, or on the roadway at some point. I went out the night before onto the Marin Headlands and climbed up the tower. And it was funny because there was a phalanx of about 1 million photographers up on Above Line Point on the mountain above, pointing these cameras with massive, like 3-foot-long lenses at the bridge. And I climbed up inside the tower, and I didn't want to be seen, obviously. And I had to climb around a piece of plate steel. It was about 15 feet, kind of free climbing on the rivet heads. So I climbed up the back side of it, so I wouldn't be seen coming up off of the bottom side of the tower and into the hatchway into the tower. And it was the dumbest thing, one of the two dumbest things I've ever done climbing, because it was a really dangerous move, and I was by myself with no protection. And anyway, I did it. I got in the tower, nobody saw me. I climbed up to the second level above the roadway and took these shots really quickly. I shot a roll of Kodachrome really quick, and they're really poor shots because I was freaking out, paranoid. There were several helicopters flying around, and one of them started taking a little bit of notice of me. The San Francisco Chronicle paid, I don't know how much, like $30,000 or $40,000 or something like that, for exclusive photo rights to the North Tower of the Golden Gate Bridge. So they took photos a little bit above me, but they did not get these photos. Hit another one, and then looking down onto the crowd below, And then what I did was I was really freaking out now because I thought I'd been seen and I was going to get busted. And so I climbed down the tower, and there's a hatchway that walks right out onto the roadway. And I had my coveralls on, so I just opened the hatchway and walked into this crowd of people. This is a very thin crowd. This is not at the height of the thing when it was literally shoulder to shoulder all the way across the bridge. So I just walked down the crowd and walked away. Just kind of checked out what people were doing. I mean, here's some shots taken. Let's see, these are I guess highway patrol at the toll plaza, and some more people kind of jamming around. Some more people on the roadway. Very starting to get a little crowded. People doing stupid things on the roadway, having fun, and you know, just kind of checking it out. It was an incredible public scene. Hard to describe if you weren't there. It's really beautiful. So what happened with the bridge almost collapsing? You may have heard about it. The roadway had been replaced a few years before. It took a couple of years of work, but they replaced the entire roadway with a new engineered road deck that was about 2/3, or I guess it was about almost half as heavy as the old road deck, which changed the curvature a little bit in the catenary in the middle, so it was a little bit higher and also capable of taking more stress than the old road decks, in really good shape. And then what happens is there's a catenary, there's a curve in the middle. If you look at the bridge from a distance, there's a curve in the middle of the road deck, and it's higher in the middle than it is at the towers. When they got all these people on the bridge, they completely flattened out. Totally flat, you know, dropping as much as 20 feet in the middle. Pretty intense amount of weight on the bridge. And from what I've read and heard, I understand that it wasn't so much the danger of the suspension span collapsing or the road deck pulling away from the suspension span. The real danger was over on the archway that's right over Fort Point. And if you look at that, if you look at Fort Point, there's an archway over it. The road deck above that supported by that archway. And I was on that archway when it was packed shoulder to shoulder, and you could not move at all. And I felt the roadway starting to shift left to right laterally. It's not made to do that at all. And that section was shifting. I could feel it shifting maybe a couple of feet left to right, left to right. And I'm thinking, I'm in the middle of this crowd, I cannot get out, and this thing is going to collapse. And it would have been that section that would have collapsed, and probably not the road deck out in the middle of the span, the sexier area where you'd think it would collapse, you know, where Mothra or Godzilla would rip into it. It was, you know, over Fort Point there. And that was one of the most frightening moments in my life. The other most frightening moment, actually I'll just digress for a moment, was climbing the Throgs Bridge in New York. We wanted to climb as many bridges there as we could, and the Throgs was way out, Queens and Bronx, in the middle of nowhere. And a long approach through these swamps, and you had to walk on a catwalk underneath the roadway for a mile. It was just raining and it was miserable. There were 4 of us, and we weren't that into it, but we had to do it because it was a Throgs Bridge, and it was a cool bridge, 400-foot towers. We got up to the tower. There was an elevator there, as there often is in bridges. We usually don't take them because it's kind of cheating. But we were, you know, and also they might be alarmed, but we were pretty sure this bridge wasn't because nobody really cared about this bridge too much. So we decided to take the elevator. There were 5 of us. We got in the elevator. It was a 3-man elevator. And we're going up, and it's going really slow, like really, really, really slow. And we're all like, can barely breathe because we're packed in like sardines in this little box. So I look up, and there's a hatchway. So Jason and I kind of look at each other. We look at the hatchway, look at each other. We climb up, we pop open the hatchway, and jump up on top of the car. We have our flashlights. We're looking up the shaft. It's really cool. Here we are, woohoo, in the bridge. And I sat down for a minute, sat down and sitting there for about 3 seconds. And then I had a weird feeling like when somebody walks over your grave, I don't know what it was. And I stood up. And the second that I stood up, the counterweight went by right where my legs were. And it would have sheared my legs off in mid-thigh without even stopping. It would have been like a hot knife in warm butter. And when I realized what happened, I just about passed out and fell off the top of the car. So that was another time on bridges where just doing stupid shit, you know. I mean, it's all the fun and games until you put your eye out. So anyway, on the Golden Gate Bridge, cars, people, fun stuff going on. And then I came back that night, and they did a cool thing on the Golden Gate Bridge where they did a firefall. It was a 4,000-foot long fire drop off of the roadway of the bridge, so that if you looked at the bridge from San Francisco, it looked like a giant wall of flame, something out of Oz or God knows where. It was a very cool thing, but I wasn't in San Francisco watching from that angle. I climbed up on the onto the tower again and took these shots of the firefall. You can kind of see it starting like along the road deck there in the middle. Those little flame outs, and you know, and then there's. I'm sorry. What's the question?
Was it fireworks?
What?
What was causing it? Fireworks?
What was called? Yeah, this fireworks. These are fireworks that were put on for the 50th anniversary celebration of the birthday of the Golden Gate Bridge. There's a barge out in the water there, just off the deck. A couple of barges that are shooting fireworks up in the air, and along the underside of the deck, if you look at where the cars are parked there, it's kind of firing up. Okay, that was a firefall that was 4,000 feet long, the entire span of the bridge from tower to tower. It's actually 4,200 some feet, but they had a like 4,000 foot firefall. And they lit it up, and it was like a wave of fire falling 200 feet from the road deck down to the water. Pretty amazing thing. Here's another shot. I gotta reframe these. And you can kind of see the smoke now kind of being generated by that. More shots. Look, you can see the barge shooting off the fireworks on the left. And another shot, a little bit smokier. I don't know if these are exactly in the sequence I took them. Oh, and the way I took these is I mounted the camera on the bridge on with a small camera clamp. I opened the aperture, and I took my hat and held my hat over the lens, and then when a good blast would come, I'd just pop it open for, you know, take the hat off for a second or two and kind of get that, and then I put the hat back over the lens, hold it, and some of these shots are, you know, like 3-minute shots, and they're completely miraculous because I had absolutely no idea what kind of an exposure I needed or how washed out they were going to be. And it's basically a miracle that they came out the way that they did, to be honest with you, knowing what little I know of photography. It's a complete miracle that they weren't a completely washed out mess. And that's the last shot of the 50th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm going to take a couple of questions.
Yeah, I got a question. You obviously know a lot about bridges. Did that come when you started climbing bridges, or was the interest about bridges first and then?
I dreamed about bridges when I was a little kid. I had a thing for bridges. I lived in Michigan. There was a Maple Street Bridge in Michigan. There's actually a story about it in my book about the Maple Street Bridge, and we used to climb that out to the middle of the Muskegon River, and I loved that bridge. I wasn't knowledgeable about bridges from any kind of a historical or engineering sense at all. I was never a very good student. I just like to climb things. And but I learned about bridges. I read a lot about them later, and I have a solid layman's knowledge of bridges. I'm not an engineer. I understand some of the basic techniques or the basic engineering principles.
What do you know about the new suspension span of the Bay Bridge?
What do I know about the new suspension span of the Bay Bridge? It's a singular bridge. I've never built a bridge that big of that type. You probably all read about it too in the papers. I know that the old span, from what I've read and from some engineers I've talked to, the old span is probably good for another 50 years, to be honest with you. That cantilever span is in much better shape than many bridges in the East Coast. We are in an earthquake zone here, so it's under stresses that those bridges wouldn't typically come under. But from what I understand, with some repairs on that bridge, the collapse of the Bay Bridge during the Lone Crater earthquake, the bridge didn't actually collapse. A section joining the cantilever span with the causeway collapsed. And the cantilever span and the causeway are literally two separate bridges. And there's a piece in between them that joins them together. And when the earthquake hit, the cantilever span, which is a big superstructure that you look at, it's what you think of as a bridge when you see it, it moved one way, and the causeway, which is the other section that you drive up from the toll plaza, went the other way. And when they both did that concurrently, the section in the middle, the bolt sheared and it just fell down. So they could have repaired that, which they did, and probably put some, a couple $100 million, $400 million repair work into the bridge, and it'd probably be good to go for another 50 years. But the new bridge is going to be pretty amazing. I hope they leave the old bridge up. I hope that we really run out of money completely and they don't have the funds to tear it down. I think that would be pretty cool. And they should you should be able to like sign a waiver, right? Like, sign a waiver and put up like let's say you put up a $5,000 body retrieval bond. So that if anything happens, the state doesn't have to pay to come scrape you off of the, whatever, get you out of the water. I think that would be really a cool thing if they would do that. You with me? More questions? Over here?
You said bridges were built to climb. What about the new concrete bridges?
Well, that's a good question. Bridges are built to climb, and what about the new concrete bridges? To climb most of those towers, you would need to plant pitons in them, and you're probably not going to get away with that. So I have to stand corrected. A lot of the new cable stay bridges with concrete towers are not that easy to climb. And I suppose there's some guys, 20-year-old guys, who figure out a way to do it, and I'll watch them on TV.
Have you ever climbed the Mackinac Bridge in Michigan?
Have I ever climbed the Mackinac Bridge in Michigan? I have not. I stopped and looked at it a couple of times. The approaches to it are really, really, really long approaches, and they're hard. It's hard to get up to the tower. And I was with my dad one time, and I didn't want him to get arrested. But that bridge is cool because for the longest time, the three biggest bridges in the world were the Golden Gate, the Mackinac, and the Verrazano. And the Golden Gate had the tallest towers, 746 feet. The Verrazano had the longest span, tower to tower, 4,000, I forget, 280 feet, something like that. And then the Mackinac Bridge had the longest triple span, land to tower to tower to land. And for the longest time, those were the three bridges in the world. But now the Swedes have a bigger bridge, and the Japanese have a bigger bridge, and America continues to decline in the bridge world. So, any more questions? Right here?
Why don't they lock the hatches in the towers? Or do they?
Why don't they lock the hatches in the tower? That's a good question. And we climbed the Golden Gate. I'll give you an example. The Golden Gate Bridge, which we climbed off and on from 1977 to 1996. There are all these different periods. They'd be painting the bridge. Sometimes the hatchways would be left open. Sometimes they'd be locked. Sometimes everything would be wide open. Often when the bridge workers were in the area, and they'd go from one end of the bridge to the other. So if they're in the area that you were in, which is, for us, climbing the bridge was always the Marin Tower, you'd find them open. We ended up making keys twice during this 20-year period. And we did that by going there at dusk, pulling this giant, heavy, stupid door off, and pulling the cylinder out, and getting it to our friendly locksmith, who shall remain nameless, who would key it that night. We go back, put the cylinder back in, and have it done by dawn. And we did that twice. And the second time we did it was when my best friend Gary Warren had passed away, and he was cremated, and I received half of his ashes in a box in the mail. And looking through his papers, I found his will, and in his will he said, "I want to be cremated and have my ashes thrown from the top of the Golden Gate Bridge on a bright sunny day." Now Gary knew very well that climbing the bridge on a bright sunny day was a really stupid thing to do and really dangerous, and you'd probably get caught. But we did it, and in order to do it, we had been in the bridge for about a year or two, and they had relocked the cylinders, so we had to go there that night, pull the cylinders, key them, get the cylinder back, and then go from there. And then we did. I went up with his ashes at dawn and waited till the sun was up and dumped them off the top of the tower, and they flittered down to the walkway below where about 15 friends were. And my friend Paul Falconer's young son, Brett, told his dad, he said, "Dad, Papa, I got some of the glitter in my eye." Took some of those ashes and I painted them, mixed them up with paint, painted them on the inside of the top of the tower, and they're there right now, the Marin Tower. So whenever you go by there, tip your hat to Gary Warren, who started the Suicide Club. Any more questions? Okay, thanks very much. Let's take a break. There's drinks. What's that, Travis? Oh, the Bay Bridge. 7-year-old Travis wanted to know what bridge I climbed with his mom, Jennifer, and I'll just let you know, Travis, we climbed the Bay Bridge, and that was at the turn of the millennium in 1999. We were dressed up in formal wear, and we got arrested. It was really kind of fun. That's another story, though. And this bridge truck's coming up in the middle of the road, one of the big bridge, tow trucks. And the guy turned on his bullhorn, and he says, "Hey," he said one thing. He said, "Hey, stupid," and I knew he was talking to me. And it's like I thought to myself, well, okay, he's right if they catch me. Yeah. And so I went back in. There's a hatchway in the top with a lock on it, right? So they figure anybody climbing the bridge goes up the cables at night, which makes sense, right? So I go in the hatch, I ship my pack, go in the hatch, climb down inside the tower, close the door, it locks behind me, and I climb down to the roadway level. It takes me about 5 minutes to get down there because I'm flying. And there's parallel vertical shafts all around, and I'm in a shaft right next to the doorway off the sidewalk, and I'm waiting there because I want to hear what they're saying when they come in. Right. A couple minutes later, 2 bridge workers and a cop open the door, and they're like, the bridge workers like, "Oh, there's some fucking idiot," they're just mumbling. I can kind of hear them. Right. And they're like, "Oh fuck, at least we're on double time."
time, or whatever, and they get in the elevator and they go up. So I know that as soon as they get to the top and they find out I'm not there, they're going to think one of two things: either I jumped and they didn't see it, or I'm inside the tower. So if they think I'm inside the tower, it's like they're going to start looking. So, and the way the tower is split up, it's vertical tower. I mean, there are two tower legs, and then the cross pieces. I'm in the one tower leg. That tower leg is split in half from top to bottom. This partition, and these shafts on either side, and it's a maze. I mean, you can go up and down for like literally days and not get out. And so I'm in this shaft, and I have to cross over to the other half of the tower leg that I'm in to get to the horizontal cross piece to get to the other tower leg where they won't look for me.
Right.
So, and to do that, there's a couple ways to do it. But one way is at the road level, but there's somebody there. They're potentially there. So I have to go all the way to the base of the tower leg, cross over at the very base, and then go up, all the way back up above the roadway to cross over the horizontal cross pieces.
Do you have to go outside on that apron?
No, it's all inside. You're all total 100%